Well, welcome everybody. While I'm messing around with this, I'll go ahead and pass it over for intros. I'm really excited to have all of you guys on here and excited to share what you guys are working on. If you are listening in or chiming in, please share, drop a note or comment questions that you might have. We can definitely pull them up on screen and give you a shout out. I'm excited, Noah. Thank you very much for putting this together. I'm going to pass the mic off to you first, but I'd love to hear kind of an quick intro from each of you, what you guys are working on, and then we can take it from there. So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm excited about this. And without further ado, Noah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to thank Mandi and the Global Hemp Association for having us. My name is Noah Miller. I'm a co-founder and partner at Calibrate Partners, an ESG strategy firm for the new normal of business. And I'm here with my good friends, Patrick and Geoff from Regennabis, who will go ahead and introduce themselves.
Which one first?
I'll jump in first, then why don't I? So my name is Geoff, Geoff Trotter at Regennabis. I'm co-founder and chief growth officer at Regennabis, an organization that's been out the gate for a little over 18 months. We're a platform entirely centered in the cannabis and hemp industry. Our platform offers three verticals, really quite simple: advisory in the sustainability, branding, and the ESG space, as well as market entry for organizations around the world to get into one market from another market. We also convene. A couple of weeks back, we had something called the Regenerative Cannabis Live, which is an event that we are hosting twice a year with the United Nations and driving the conversation around both for and by the cannabis and hemp industry and tackling all of those issues that are the herd of elephants in the room with regards to this industry. And then the third area is we have a ventures fund, which is currently being built out and we're raising capital for. So that's us in a nutshell, but you can now hear from Patrick and his dulcet tones.
Yep. Thanks very much, Geoff. Very nice to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation. My name is Patrick McCartan. I'm CEO and co-founder of Regennabis. Geoff's pretty much covered everything there. Just to add a little bit more flavor to what we do, we're very much aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as we see that 17 goals as the framework which we've taken from the corporate world into the cannabis hemp world. And it's given the cannabis industry and many cannabis companies sort of a North Star and some type of direction in which they can sort of build their sustainability and their ESG programs and the strategies around. So just add a little bit more flavor, but I'm very much looking forward to the conversation today.
Well, I'm excited. So I'm curious, how did everybody get into this? And when did this become a topic around the cannabis and hemp space so much? A lot of people will say, what is hemp or what is cannabis's biggest value? And really, I think it's where it sits at the conversation of the environmental sustainability, the circular economies. Can you guys speak a little bit to when cannabis really became that leading conversation?
I can speak to that. I can give a philosophical answer as well as a more precise one in terms of dates. I suppose the philosophical one is it's still not quite there, or indeed you could counter and say we first started having a conversation around hemp specifically and its applicability around sustainability more than 100 years ago. So you could argue that we're revisiting that. And when we look at the cannabis and hemp industry, just to sort of bring this into context, we roughly break it into three subsectors of adult use recreation, health, wellness, and medical, and then the hemp industry, for want of a term. And the conversation around sustainability is equally applicable, but throughout the next hour or so, we'll really focus on hemp and the opportunity around hemp to really drive some of the solutions that we are seeking and that I think most humanity is seeking to some of humanity's greatest challenges, and so looking at some of the aspects around how hemp we think can be a game changer if we can just get this industry really aligned to these sustainability objectives. So that I'll just leave it at that and see if Patrick or Noah had anything to add.
I can jump in here. I suppose coming from the corporate sustainability world, where I'd worked with many corporations, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Amazon, Ford, I'd worked at the sort of the center of their and observed the evolution of their sustainability journey to become leading global brands. And when we think about hemp as a sustainable material and all the many thousands of applications that hemp delivers, I got more and more excited by the potential and the opportunity that was evolving several years ago around hemp. And as a result of that, I moved from the corporate sustainability world into the cannabis and hemp industry with my sustainability ESG cap on, helping and hoping to be able to drive some of the learns and experiences that we had gotten from the corporate sustainable world into the cannabis and hemp world. And typically we break these into three different areas. We've got the recreational, of course, adult use, psychoactive. We've got the medical, non-psychoactive, and of course we've got hemp, industrial hemp. And that's, industrial hemp is going to be one of the biggest industries in the world. It's going to be, it'll impact everything, hopefully, because it offers a sustainable solution for literally everything. And that's the beauty of what hemp has to offer. This, once we normalize, we regulate and legalize it globally, of course, because we still have a lot of regulations to get around. So that's a little bit about my snapshot of my journey into hemp.
Okay, well, I'm thrilled. I suppose you guys, this is an awesome presentation, so I'm excited about it.
And Mandi, I guess you'll jump in every now and again if there's
I'll ask questions
for the audience, right? More than
absolutely, I've got it for sure. And everybody else that's listening, please don't hesitate. Drop questions in. I know LinkedIn's been a little bit glitchy today. I saw that. I thought it was just me, but I was relieved to know it wasn't. But yeah.
Great. So, what we're going to be talking about today is really setting the stage around the role of hemp in the new normal of business, and really positioning hemp as both a driver of ESG performance for other industries and also the opportunities for the hemp industry to commercialize a lot of the solutions that Geoff and Patrick had mentioned to accelerate that transition for other industries and other customers. This is really framed as the industry's guide to ESG.
Well, I think we've done the who we are, but in essence, we're going to run through these items 2 through 5 and then leave it to the audience on the Q&A front. And I think our intention is to move from 30,000 feet and above to even come down to ground level, maybe even go below the ground and then come back up. So the idea is to create a sort of a broader sense of where we feel that the hemp industry can fit into the solutions provision around the Sustainable Development Goals, but also then speak about ESG and how environmental social governance, to some degree answering question 2, is a driver. And so we can jump to that next slide, but we'll go in and out of these topics as we run through the series of this conversation. So what is ESG? I'll kick this off, and then obviously Patrick and Noah can jump in too. ESG has been around for about 16 years. Environmental social governance was first banded around as a phrase in 2005 on the back of work that was being undertaken by the UN. The idea here is that whilst many folks will talk about sustainability and they'll talk about corporate social responsibility and lots of other terms that get thrown around, the sense is that unless we really are taking into account the environmental social governance factors that your organization is involved with and in, then it's very difficult to then create your sustainability narrative, which, put it this way, sustainability is a kind of is inside out. So you're looking first in your organization and then projecting out. That's your sustainability narrative. But you can't possibly have that position without fully understanding what your internal position is, driven by external factors. So it's sort of, if you like, outside in. And those external factors are put into those 3 buckets of environmental issues, social issues, and governance, which is broadly around the economic aspects, but also takes into consideration how a government has or how an organization operates. And most of the work that has been undertaken in the world of environmental social governance implementations is really driven through the investor lens. So increasingly, investors are being tasked to ensure that the organizations that they're looking to invest in are environmentally social governance aligned. But at Regennabis, and I know also increasingly at Calibrate, one of the things that we're also looking at is, let's look at it also from the organization's perspective. What is it that an organization could and should be doing to address the environmental, social, and governance issues relevant and pertinent to their business? You could argue material to their business. And one of the things that we've set out to help with is to kind of help frame what this is, but more importantly, what you could do about it and what you should be doing about it, because for sure the investor community are going to be asking for it at some point. And so I'll leave it at that and maybe hand over to Noah and Patrick, and they can speak to this too.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, just to elaborate on Geoff's point, Noah, I think, this is still a very early conversation for the cannabis and hemp industry. There are just a number of companies out there that have an ESG strategy. There's one company that have actually released an ESG report, which was very exciting, several weeks ago, Rubicon Organics. So again, we're at the very, very start of the journey of ESG in cannabis and hemp. But I think the exciting thing here is that this is going to really snowball in 2021, and I suspect that we suspect and hope that ESG will become core to all cannabis businesses in 2022 and beyond. So I think it's just to give some context as to where ESG is right now in the industry and where it will be in the short amount of time. Over to you, Noah.
Yeah, and just to add one comment on here, oftentimes ESG is equated with concepts like corporate purpose, and we just want to dispel that a bit, that your corporate purpose, the environmental or social impact you have on the world through your products and services is one element of it. And really ESG is the set of business practices or the vehicle that delivers on that corporate purpose in a meaningful and systematic way. So a good way to think about the relationship between purpose and ESG is really ESG is that collection of practices that delivers on that corporate purpose.
Yeah. I think often we refer to it as context-based. People will talk about sustainability, and part of the sustainability narrative that many organizations sort of build out is this. They include philanthropy in there as well. And, philanthropy is great, but if it's not relevant or material to your business, then it's really just, at worst, it's performative. At best, it encourages and it can do good. But if it's not material to your business, in other words, if you stop doing it, your business is not going to suffer. And from our perspective, we're saying that if we really want to perform at the best level as a business and to deliver the best economic upside as possible, so make no bones about it, we're approaching this very much from a capitalist perspective. You could argue that we're going better than another level beyond just capitalism. We're looking at multi-capitalism, because we're also very interested in ensuring that there's a social upside as well as an environmental upside. And if organizations get that, then they'll be on the right side of history. And you don't have to look too far in other industries to look at things like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index on a sector-by-sector basis, and you can see those organizations that are embracing environmental social governance issues are performing economically better than their competitors who are not. So that's already out there. So that's the essence of what we're really doing.
Would you say that's mainly because the consumer-driven markets?
Yes, for sure. Absolutely. You're right. And there's a slide later on which looks specifically at one segment of the consumer world, which is, of course, one of the fastest growing, and that's the demographic referred to as millennials. Increasingly, they are seeking and purposely seeking, intentionally seeking those organizations that have products and services that are doing less harm to the environment, more social good, And they're the ones that they want to be spending money with. So for sure, that's happening, and not just in the cannabis industry, but you could argue perhaps more in the cannabis and hemp industry because of the community that's in this industry. They're probably more tuned into the environmental and social aspects than perhaps other consumers. So yeah.
There's a lot wrapped into this for sure.
Yeah.
And to just add on to
and then before we jump on, yeah, carry on, Patrick.
Oh, sorry, Geoff. Yeah, just to add to that point. I mean, in today's world, it's very difficult for a company to really behave maybe in like they would have done a few years ago or 5-10 years ago with social media. We've seen a lot of case studies and examples of companies, whether they're in the cannabis industry or not, or that have behaved in an unethical way, whether it had environmental or social or any type of governance behaviors that were not in tune with building a sustainable business. They've been exposed, and there's really nowhere to hide in this day and age with social media and with consumers really voicing their support and also distaste of these type of behaviors, which is a great thing because it really is putting the fire on a lot of these companies and leaders to really build ESG-driven, sustainable, ethical businesses, and at the end of the day, these will ultimately be the leading sustainable brands of the future. So it's a win-win for a company and for consumers and for everyone to build companies like that.
Noah, do you have anything else you want to add before we skip? Want to stay on this slide for a little bit longer?
That's okay. We can move on to the next slide.
See, slow switching. Here we go.
So I'll kind of kick us off here and set the stage for Geoff and Patrick to dive in a bit deeper. So, we started this talk about ESG, the new normal of business. So let's break that down at a high level, why it truly is the new normal of business. In our year of 2020, a post-COVID, post-George Floyd, the death of George Floyd and the global reckoning on systemic racism, at this point, it is a baseline expectation that a publicly traded company is engaging environmental and social issues in leveraging their business model to positively impact those in as a competitive advantage. And you're seeing these requirements trickle down to privately owned companies too, when public companies are putting ESG-centric procurement requirements to do business with them because of the attention on supply chains and the environmental and social impacts that occur across supply chains. So not only are public companies on the hook, but the private companies that do business with them now have to get in line in order to even compete in the procurement process. Next, when you're looking at climate, it's well recognized that climate risk is financial risk and poses the greatest sort of systemic risk to our global financial system. With the investment community really recognizing the interconnectedness between climate risk exposure and financial exposure, there is a significant amount of tension on what a company is doing, both to mitigate its contributions to climate change and reduce its risk exposure to climate change. Connected to that here is really all of the regulatory environment moving towards public disclosures on climate risk, as well as human capital management here in the States. But when you're looking at it globally in the US, the EU, the UK, Japan, Canada, and I'll let Patrick and Geoff dive in because this is really their area of expertise. But you're seeing this global demand for transparency, actionable detail on your climate risk strategy, and consistent performance data being disclosed with recognized disclosure frameworks like SASB and TCFD.
Do you want us to jump in there, or you want to continue?
Yeah, you guys can jump in because I know that you guys are global.
Right. Well, just to and to bring all of that into context, I mean, on the climate risk alone, I mean, ultimately, what we're really looking at here is sustainability is nothing but environmental justice, because beyond all of the stuff that's going on at an environmental level, that has a drop-down effect at the social fabric, and then there's, as Noah alluded to in the first point. So we're seeing all sorts of tension happening, and not to get too carried away here, but there's somewhat of an existential crisis, and you don't have to go too far to see others commenting on that. But there are bodies there now. Certainly, to some degree, the US is playing catch up, but when you have things like TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, you're then beginning to see that there are bodies out there that are seeking better behaviors from publicly listed organizations, and as Noah has referenced, now leaching into the private sector as well. So there are bodies out there that are seeking better behaviors because, frankly, it ought to be the way of doing business. And for those who are only focused on economic upsides, economic capital, then the good news is that if you do this, actually, you'll have better results anyway. So you might as well do it. And so that's the point that's being raised here. Now, you might as well do it is different from being mandated to do it. And for sure, that's coming. You just have to look at the Biden administration and what's happening with the appointment of Gensler, the head of the SEC. And now the SEC are beginning to look at how do they mandate for ESG performance metrics appearing in, for example, 10K filings. So this is happening. And as I say, we're in catch-up mode. And one of the things that we're identifying here collectively is that this is the new normal of business. And so for many, you have to sit up and pay a little bit of attention.
There's a couple of questions, you guys. Drew has a question. Oh, and I see we lose. Sorry, Patrick, we're covering you up for just a second. But what are your thoughts about B Corps? And is it a good model or framework to assist in improving the triple bottom line?
Yes. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of B Corps in my company, and I would say that ESG is the publicly traded version of a B Corp. In the broadest, most general sense, and all of the sort of B Corp criteria is could be parallel to ESG criteria. So really, I would say it's almost a brand of ESG centric companies, particularly smaller companies, right? With the known being really the only publicly traded B Corp. So really same issues, same concepts, different certification, different nomenclature, but same general concepts.
Excellent. And then there was one other question I see on here is, how does ESG apply in non-industrial world?
That's a great question. It applies to any organization, whether you're a for-profit or otherwise, because we're part of a system. So, and actually this, probably the next point, talks about supply chains and stewardship. I mean, ultimately, as you look up and down your supply chain, the smarter organizations are recognizing that they're going to market not only with other for-profit entities, but with not-for-profit entities, because those not-for-profit entities are the ones that you could say are on the ground delivering some of the solutions that we're talking about at an environmental and a social level. So the smarter, savvy public companies who get this are seeking relationships with those not-for-profit organizations. And so it would be a smart move for most nonprofit entities to at least look at what their own environmental social governance factors are. You don't have to be a publicly listed entity, and you don't have to be private either. You could just be a good old-fashioned nonprofit. And I've worked in many nonprofits myself, and I know that there are many out there that see that this is it's first and foremost, it's great business practice to recognize that your not-for-profit is a business, and therefore to sort of do this. But the other thing is, it gives a great indication that this is front of your mind too, and therefore when it comes to partnering with organizations that ultimately you wish to partner with, then you're finding like-minded partners. So very important.
And just to touch on the climate risk is financial risk. I think that's an important point for the hemp industry, because we know that hemp, as I've mentioned already, can be a replacement for we can replace plastics, hemp-based plastics, bioplastics, packaging, paper. As we know, there's tens of thousands of applications of hemp, and all of the contributors to climate change that have gone on over the past 100 or 200 years, from the Industrial Revolution and so forth. We do see hemp as being a game changer for humanity if we can get this right. And that's why we're putting a huge effort into really trying to bring the case of hemp to the highest levels of the United Nations, so we can normalize, legalize, and regulate hemp globally, so countries and companies can really start to build it into the fabric of their communities, of their social programs, their businesses, supporting entrepreneurship around hemp, because we do see it being a driver and hopefully mitigator of climate risk, and therefore will have a major impact on decreasing financial risk globally. So hemp, not many people, I don't know if many people think of hemp that way, but we have to think about it in a global perspective on how it can contribute to hopefully decarbonizing the world in some form, and then reversing some of the damage that we've done to the climate.
Absolutely.
So I'll dive in here and just, kind of continue to make the case here why ESG is the new normal and it's never going back to the way before, or, pre-ESG. When you're thinking about the millennial demographic, right, and the fact that 75% of the workforce by 2025 will be millennials, let's just break that down for a sec. You're looking at your investors, your customers, general consumers, employees, suppliers, all having ESG-centric expectations, both as a consumer and as a professional that you're doing business with. So that's a clear indicator this isn't going to be going anywhere unless millennials tend to exit the workforce en masse. The other critical thing with that point about that 75% is millennials grew up with a deeper awareness and greater connectivity to environmental, social, and economic issues, having been in the financial crisis, this past COVID-induced economic recession. And I'll tell you what, millennials have a big BS alarm for greenwashing. And that is the key challenge right now, is to be able to speak about what you're doing accurately, concisely, into a level of technical sophistication that is understood. But the claims of sustainable and natural and green is going to set off greenwashing alarms for this group of employees and consumers.
Absolutely.
All right, I think on this next slide, what we're going to be doing is just going to come back to the world of hemp and specifically. So what we've done thus far is just frame what is ESG in the broader context, and we've had a lot of other industry references and sector references. But if we look at hemp specifically, and we marry that with this notion of a regenerative industry, regenerative agriculture. So this is, taking this concept of what is an almost failed industry, agriculture as the industrial sort of agricultural complex. What we're looking at here is that if we embrace regenerative industries, and agriculture is one of them, then we believe that hemp actually can drive a lot of other regenerative industries. So you think of any industry out there right now that begins with the letter F, hemp can disrupt and innovate in that space, whether it's food, fiber, fashion, fabrics, pharma, as in PH, I know it doesn't begin with F, but it sounds like it, and ultimately finance. So we know that hemp is very well placed, and this is something that we're going to dive into here, but if we frame it in the context of regenerative agriculture, then you see that these 5 things, ultimately, because hemp is a remediator, a soil remediator, supporting, as it says also number 2 there, supporting broader bioremediation, then hemp is somewhat unique in this sense that it as it grows, it remediates soil. And why is that important? Something called Google, check it out. Just look at soil health, and you'll realize that within 60 years, if we don't correct this, the US will be a dust bowl. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. So we want to look at how do we create a movement that moves away from monocrops, vast fields of wheat and corn, etc., but actually create multi-crop rotation. And hemp is because of its different yields and the way it grows, could be a game changer. Marry that to the fact that it grows at the rate it grows, but also is a fantastic carbon sequester. greater than say the 25 years it would take for trees to grow to a full growth, then you can see that here's another market opportunity looking at carbon sequestration, which if you then create something out of that hemp, like hempcrete, then you're locking in that CO2, and there it is. It's you could argue it's permanently sequestered. Also, we're looking at water and stress related to not just our water tables, but ultimately to our aquifers, which, when you get rid of an aquifer, that's it, you're done. Water tables wax and wane, but an aquifer, once it's gone, it's gone. And so we need to be thinking about the use of water from an agricultural perspective, and I've already referenced these multiple yields per annum. Depends on where you're growing it, but it could be anything from 3 or 4 yields per year. So in that sense, this is a potential game changer. What we then look at is, what happens once we have created then this industrial hemp engine? And so that's a little bit more flavor around why we think that this is a potential game changer. And if we marry it back to then great stewardship around how you run your hemp business through ESG processes, etc., then what happens is solutions for the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the next slide. But we'll just stay there in case Patrick or Noah may wish to add to this slide too.
Well, just a very quick point about this regenerative agriculture. It's regeneration is one of the words that we've used quite a bit at Regennabis, regenerative cannabis. I think this process here and the impact, that's really starting to resonate with a lot of the Fortune 500 companies and the global brands as they start to think about alternative sustainable solutions for their raw materials for their products. We've already seen companies like Levi's, Patagonia, and several other global brands start to incorporate hemp threads into their products, and working with some of the North American farmers, the hemp farmers. I think this is the start of a beautiful new industry that's emerging. And if we can start to really get these global Goliaths, if you will, incorporating regenerative agriculture and be part of this process, we're driving sustainable development. We're really moving towards positive change here. So I think that's an important point to add here too. Sorry, Noah.
Yeah, so just one quick item that I'll just add on to here is the really unique opportunity, particularly around the carbon sequestration element of hemp, is really the economic development for rural communities, for vulnerable populations, for workforce development, for farming practices that maximize the carbon sequestration potential of the hemp grow. I mean, there's a lot of interconnected elements that really create shared value for all people involved, from the operator to the local community to the farmer that no longer can sell milk because people aren't drinking as much milk. There's a lot of interconnected value creation that's inherent in the sustainable elements of just the hemp plant. So that's what's really exciting about all of this as well.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
This is just a reference to, I mentioned that if we get this right, then potentially we can solve for many of the challenges that are outlined in these 17 goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. Everything from no poverty, right through to eradicating hunger, and 14, 15, 16. 16, I think, is very important. It recognizes that we need to have just institutions, meaning those that are driven by, looking at environmental justice, social justice, as well as economic justice. And we reference all the time that as a politician once said, it takes a village. And so SDG 17 is this notion of partnering to develop these goals and to deliver to these goals. And we think that hemp is very well positioned. In fact, the next slide really just gives an indicator of, for each of those SDGs is just one example of how the cannabis and hemp industry can impact, whether it's poverty, whether it's eradicating hunger, looking at things like number 10 and reducing inequalities, that's right in the wheelhouse of the cannabis and hemp industry. We really must address, as Noah pointed out too, those folks on whose shoulders this industry, you could argue, was built on. And the way that this industry is going right now, they're going to be left behind. We can't let that happen. We should not let that happen. It's an imperative that we are inclusive, including, of course, indigenous populations who have been growing cannabis and hemp uninterrupted for centuries. And so we must make sure that they're involved in this industry as we build that out. So that's just an example. There are thousands of examples that, just as an indicator, I think this slide really helps get the imagination going.
Out of all of your experience and research, out of these 17 goals, where have you seen the biggest impact from hemp?
Well, that's a good question. I would say undoubtedly climate 13. Which is, if you're looking at this as a clock, it's like at the 8 o'clock mark, 9 o'clock mark. Cannabis and hemp is an important lever for climate action in the context of many other SDGs. So it's a tipping point in many ways, but it's fundamentally, it's the biggest challenge facing all of us right now. And I think hemp is very well positioned to create a massive amount of impact. So yeah, that would be my guess.
I suppose for me it would be a great one there, Geoff, but also the SDG 3, good health and well-being, and hemp as a nutritious food. From all of the hemp hearts, the hemp milk, there's many, many different products that I have in my kitchen and have had for quite some time, hemp oils, etc., that these are extremely nutritious and affordable products that are able to replace other probably more harmful products that are in our kitchens. And I think once we start to really populate the world with hemp products, food products, nutritious products, that'll drive good health and well-being for all societies and all humanity. I know it's lofty visionary thinking, but it's actually very much the case. So SDG 3 for me. Yeah. Noah, which is yours?
So I don't know if this would be what I've seen with the biggest impact, but I'll say what gets me the most excited. And that's really, I think, the role that hemp and, the hemp industry as an enabler for sustainable development, the impact it has on global stability. I served in the Israeli army, and I remember thinking, what if we were able to create better jobs so there wasn't so much security challenges and there was better prosperity and local opportunity for folks coming from vulnerable, disenfranchised backgrounds. And I just, that's really what I'm excited about, is the ability to develop and scale sustainable solutions to these broad global goals as a vehicle for normalization and for, global geostability. Yeah. So that's kind of another lofty goal, Patrick, but also something that I truly believe is possible through the hemp industry.
Yeah. Mandi, before we move on, what's yours?
Oh, I think housing. I think the ability that we have to provide sustainable housing to some of the most rural, poverty-struck areas, and then food right on top of that, being able to feed these rural areas and bring the manufacturing right back to within our borders, right, within our communities, within our cultures. Yeah. Sorry,
I didn't mean to interject. I thought that you could stop, but actually it was my computer that stopped and then it started again. So I'm really sorry about that. I did not
Yeah.
But what's interesting, when we engage early on with potential clients, we go through a little bit of gamification. Mm-hmm. We talk about the SDGs and we get people in the room to sort of, as Noah did, he said, "Oh, I'm not sure if this is the most important, but it's the one that creates the most impact for him." And that's pretty much where it starts. Which is one of these 17 that gets you most agitated? And that's a great place to start, because if you want to start changing and being part of a transformative change, then at least know yourself. We like doing this, and it's a great opportunity to say, which is the thing that really pisses me off, to use a phrase.
Well, and it's funny, so many of them overlap, right? When we talk about the, creating sustainable housing, it also very much impacts the climate change and impacts, the well-being and the economic development. And so they all are just so intertwined, and hemp just has its little roots spread out into every single one of those. Karen had a really good question just now. She said, I think that I saw a headline, and I would show this on the screen, but I'm afraid when I do, Patrick disappears. And so and then I was like, well, I'll just remove myself, and then you won't be able to get the question. I think I saw a headline recently that the UN has gone after cannabis again. You mentioned efforts with the UN. Can you expand on those efforts or that of others?
And you're absolutely right. There was a vote December the 3rd, 2020, so not that long ago. There are 53 sitting nations. There are 192 nations in the United Nations, but 53 of them get to vote on the Convention around narcotics and drugs and the scheduling and or the descheduling of cannabis. And in that vote, it was narrow, but it was a 27-25 victory, if you like, for the descheduling of cannabis to enable then nations to move ahead legally to start looking at medical research around cannabis. So this is kind of like, it's a bit like here in the United States, state by state, slowly realizing that, yes, we should legalize cannabis. And in much the same way as, as people have commented, when New York went legal, it kind of has proven to be, although maybe not, depends who you're listening to, yet to happen, but you could see it's a game changer. So that is a reference there. Come back to that vote in December. It's a framing by that particular convention and that body that says we see and we realize and recognize that there is this shift that needs to happen, and so we're slowly seeing positive impacts and positive thinking from the UN. And as part of the work that we're doing with Regennabis, is this series of conversations that we take, twice a year. That's the intention. And in December, we will be in the UN with Regennabis, with 250 folks talking about these issues and driving this change, even though it's not internationally legal. But we know, as anybody could know, this is coming. So let's get prepared for it. And because we do believe that cannabis and hemp could be a game changer for humanity if we just get our heads out of this prohibitive thinking and end the war on drugs. And we're already seeing some nations beginning to embrace that. So it's happening, it's coming.
There aren't very many other products or commodities or crops that fit into every single one of these 17, goals. And so I think that it speaks volumes. When you say game changer, I think what about it would not be?
Yeah, absolutely.
What isn't, and why aren't we pushing this? So
and that's coming. And that's why we're taking this conversation, as I mentioned, to the highest level at the United Nations. It's very much around education, really, because when you don't know, you don't know. But we've spoken to a lot of government folks, a lot of folks that are not in the industry or are unaware. And once they become aware and understand of the potential for, for hemp in all of its different forms, that's when the light bulb goes off with them, and that's when the support starts to come in, and that's when they start to talk internally with their own respective governments. And we've been having these conversations with governments from Colombia and many other governments around the world. It's an educational phase. That's why we're bringing this conversation to the Regenerative Cannabis Live events that Geoff alluded to in the UN. So we'll be posting more about that on our socials. So watch the space.
Yeah, and Mandi, if I could just also speak to something that you referenced when you said two things. Hemp, there are very few other crops or commodities that really hit all 17. But the other thing that you said, which is absolutely spot on, is that these are all linked, these 17 things. And the purpose behind these Sustainable Development Goals is actually, you can't really look at any one in isolation because it's a system. We're a system, and the more we think as systems thinkers, the more this just becomes like every day. And that's part of what we're seeking to do here through this sort of implementation around environmental social governance factors. They're linked. They're absolutely linked to what happens both inside your organization as well as outside. And therefore it becomes an imperative of leaders to embrace it, because it'll be the best version of you as a leader and then your organization. So that's the point there.
I love it. Next, do you guys have anything you want to add on this slide?
I I think we've already touched it.
Yeah.
That's the first one that you just mentioned. Yeah. And this slide really just helps us bring it home a little bit, because we're going to get into some Q&A, I guess. Noah, he crafted this slide, and I love this slide. Noah, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, and I'll do a quick run through of the 5, and I'd love to hear Patrick and Geoff expand and dive a bit deeper. But these right now, we want to give you really actionable tactics that you could deploy right now within your organization to get an ESG strategy off the ground. So, number 1, just taking an inventory of what is the role that ESG plays in our immediate ecosystem with our customers, our suppliers, our consumers, investors, and also local conditions on the ground. We're really getting an understanding of what are the issues of greatest importance to the stakeholders that we depend on to run our business, and what does it mean for the future as we start looking at our growth strategy, new markets we want to enter, or new partners that we need to bring a new product or service to market. We're really understanding the pressure and what to do about it in the broader sense of your daily operations in your immediate ecosystem. Next, you're really looking at what issues matter most to our business from an operational standpoint, from a procurement standpoint, from a market entry standpoint, and what issues are of greatest concern, again, to those stakeholders that we depend on. So this is really critical around materiality, because a lot of the ESG conversation gets blurred when folks start addressing every issue because everything is good, and that makes it the good, the better. We would suggest instead that you really double down on focusing on your material issues, because those are the issues that will drive commercial opportunity, reduce material risk, and really provide the vehicle for that corporate purpose in a time that greenwashing and tokenism accusations are so imminent. So, very long story short, instead of a shotgun where you spray every good cause you can, choose specifically the issues that create those risks and opportunities to your business. Next, really making sure you have long-term goals set for those material issues, and really co-creating a strategy with those stakeholders that you depend on to run your business. So clear goals, key performance indicators, and a strategy that's built in conjunction with the folks you need to execute it with you. Number 4, quite often there are times that ESG initiatives, that's the way that ESG is framed as an initiative, but that would imply that there's an endpoint. We suggest you focus on integration, which is really that daily push of embedding your ESG strategy in the daily operations of your business, so that your policies, your systems, your processes, the way you communicate with stakeholders all reinforces that central strategy and that long-term vision. And then lastly, and this is really critical, especially for those publicly traded companies, is to collect performance data and disclose using a credible framework like the Sustainable Accounting Standards Boards, or as we talked about before, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, because that will paint the clearest picture to the investment community, to your other stakeholders that are increasingly becoming educated on these issues due to the relevance in their worlds, and making sure that you're able to concisely and accurately disclose how you're doing and what you're going to do to improve on that next iteration. So that's the quick and dirty of it. Geoff and Patrick, please feel free to dive in and expand.
Geoff, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can. For sure. I mean, as Noah has pointed out, the interesting thing here is just to take a step and not to be kind of like overawed with the fact that there's an alphabet soup coming at you. Because it's coming for sure. But I think, and I give an example. We know in instances when we're talking with CEOs of publicly listed cannabis companies, when we ask them about ESG, there's a nil response, and it's not that they are not doing anything in this space. It's just they haven't surfaced it to that level, and that's what needs to happen. And this is what this is intended to do, is to say, let's just identify what it is that is environmentally impactful for us, socially impactful, and from a governance perspective, outside there is impacting us inside. and it's material to our business. And if we begin this journey recognizing it's not an endpoint, because there are lots of things that are going to happen, lots of externalities, lots of new regulations and people mandating what you should do. So there's always going to be some change. So don't put it off and say, we're waiting to be told what the report framework should look like. Just get out there and do it. And so when an investor on a call says to a CEO, tell me a little bit about your ESG frameworks, rather than saying nothing, say, well, this is what we're planning on doing. This is what we have done so far. These are the things that we think are relevant to what we're doing, and the things that, as we then create the narrative around our sustainability performance, it's appealing to our investors. It's what's appealing to people who would like to join our organization, and it's also what's appealing to consumers who want to buy our product. And why wouldn't you do that? Because ultimately, you're trying to grow your business. And those are three of the key drivers of growing a business: access to capital from investors, getting the right employees to come and join you. And after all, there's a lot of opportunity out there now, post-COVID. And then, of course, consumers. So those three stakeholders are critical. So being able to sort of speak to them and at least show them that you're on the path, I think that's what we're sort of really, talking about here. So
and great points there, Geoff. And also to add to that, I think a lot of these companies are already actually doing a lot of these things that would make up an ESG business and an ESG strategy. There's a lot of within the governments, obviously, board composition. There's diversity, there's equity, there's inclusiveness on a lot of these boards, and that's just one example. Leadership, gender and diversity. How are these organizations engaging with their employees? Is the greater that we engage with the employees, the greater the happiness, the satisfaction, the productivity, the greater the business. There's many of these things already actually happening, and it's just a matter of really sort of structuring and building that out with the support of organizations that offer these type of services to be able to start at least to put the sort of the building blocks of an ESG a plan in place. I think on the flip side to all of this too, this isn't just a nice thing to do. This is a very, very strategic business approach. And there are a lot of business cases, case studies out there that showcase the return on investment for initially, investing in an ESG strategy, bringing a firm into to help with this. But the return on that is exponential, actually, right across the board. So don't be afraid of change. A lot of this work is actually already done. It's just a matter of restructuring, understanding it, taking first steps, and understanding that there is a business case behind all of this is critical for hemp companies and all cannabis companies to really start thinking about.
Yeah.
Well, and there's so many, like you said before, so many of the investment companies are focusing on investing where this is a focus, right? It's no longer only, social responsibility is real. And especially as we start to see these initiatives advance, and the United States really starting to adopt more of these initiatives, what do you guys really see as impact or change that you could offer? Or I think you kind of said it, become aware, take one step. Yeah. Do you have any other advice or anything else you really see coming down, or maybe something that surprised you as this has really started to evolve?
I think one point, sorry, Noah,
go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I can say this very quickly. I'm just conscious of our time too. One of the key parts here is that most cannabis and hemp companies are looking for some type of capital investment, and that's a critical part at the juncture of where this whole industry is. Mm-hmm. And we're beginning to see more and more investors starting to demand ESG, some type of commitment to ESG and sustainability from these companies in order for those investors to be able to deploy capital into these companies. we started Regennabis Ventures actually is an impact ESG screened fund for private equity, and we're hoping to see more and more of these investor funds come into the cannabis industry. We are seeing some, but we're hoping to see more. Geoff, I'm going to ask you a question because you're the one with this this piece of data on the trillions of dollars that are going into sustainable investments. I'm talking about globally. Geoff, you have that data?
Yeah, I mean, okay. Off the top of my head, then yes. In terms of in 2018, there was a report that looked at total assets under management, managed money in the United States, and it was like $48 trillion. This is professionally managed monies, of which 12 trillion, $1 in $4, was earmarked for sustainable, responsible impact investing, SRI investing. So $1 in $4. In 2020, when the last completed a report in this space, which came from SIF, the US SIF, not SIF, the SIF, the number had gone to $51 trillion, so it had grown by 3 trillion. But the number had jumped from 12 trillion to 17 trillion. So now $1 in $3 is going into sustainable, responsible impact investing. And that flow is coming from institutional investors who are realizing that this is a path forward. But more importantly, they're being told this is the path forward. It's their fiduciary duty. They have to look for maximization of their shareholder returns. And in order to do that, the evidence is already there that says that actually, if you focus on environmental, social, governance issues, as well as just the economics, you will be delivering the fiduciary duty that's expected. So that's why this is coming. But increasingly, the other big group is the family offices. So the massive growth in trillions of dollars that are now under management by family offices. And the thing about family offices, generally those who are impact focused, they want to see a social impact and an environmental impact. And frankly, the cannabis and hemp industry is rife with opportunity. That's where we see this, and Patrick's absolutely right. Access to capital, whether in the public sector, public traded businesses or the private sector, is a critical component to growth. And that's why this is important.
Yeah, I love it. There was another question, and I have a question. I guess I'm kind of wondering, what was the biggest surprise from you, as you guys are pushing these initiatives? When I go into this, I think, okay, this certain type of business, say plastics, they're not going to budge, for example, right? I'm just using that as an example. Are there certain companies that you went into and you thought, man, this is an uphill battle, that have really just latched on and said, no, this is where we need to go, and have taken the shift?
That's a great question.
It's a great question. I think it's a mix of both. So there's been various different responses. I'm just conscious of our time. I think we've seen several CEOs of MSOs really start to think about, we need to do something seriously about this. We need to build this into the fabric of our business on the cannabis side. And so there's been a sort of a soft commitment to that. It's going to take time, of course. These are big organizations, multi-billion-dollar organizations, publicly listed. So on that front, and then some others where we've seen, and obviously not mentioning any names, we've seen a sort of a slower response to building this into their business. So I think it's a mix of both. Okay.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. Well, there were quite a few questions that have come in, or quite a few comments. Amanda says, it does feel like alphabet soup someday. So thanks very much for putting this together. For everybody that is watching, we will record these and it will be published, transcribed, and shared on our YouTube channel. So it will be a resource that can be shared. We'll also cut it up and kind of share little snippets to get the information out as well. How do people get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more or engaging? What does that look like, and how do people contact you?
For Regennabis, you can contact myself or Geoff on LinkedIn. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can contact us, info@regennabis.com. We're all over social media, and you can see regennabis.com. and also regenerativecannabislive.com, which is the series of events that we mentioned. So really the best way is to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and info at Regennabis if you want to reach out to us too. Awesome.
Noah, what about you, sir?
All the above, but put Calibrate Partners instead of Regennabis. But no, seriously, LinkedIn, if you type in Calibrate Partners, you'll find our website. And I just want to offer this to all the listeners. If there's any time that anyone wants to riff on this material, you know where to find us, because that's part of, teamwork makes the dream work, and we got a lot of stuff to take care of. So, please